Hello and welcome to the Isles Nation podcast. I'm Pete Truskowski, and I'm joined today by Mike Rankowski and a special guest, Kat Silverman of the Leafs Nation, who will help us preview tomorrow's Islander game against the Toronto Maple Leafs. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Doing,
Mike, how are you?
yeah, doing well over here, Pete. And thanks again, Kat, for taking a few minutes to kind of go over these no-name Leafs that I'm sure a lot of the Islander fans are looking at the roster up and down and trying to figure out who the hell they are. So I know Pete has a couple questions he wants to get to. So Pete, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, let's start it off with the fact that the Islanders are coming off a huge emotional win over a team they're directly competing against, and the Toronto Maple Leafs are at the bottom of the NHL standings. So there's a good chance of a letdown for the Islanders. So with that in mind, is Toronto right now playing like a defeated team that barely shows up, or is this a team that just isn't good enough but shows up every night and plays hard? What kind of effort should Islander fans expect from this group?
They're actually a pretty solid group. They're not necessarily the most skilled group, but they've brought in a couple guys that, like you were saying, playing like a team that wants to win, even if they necessarily can't, versus a team that looks defeated. They don't look defeated. They've added guys like Brooks Lake. They've added Milan Mahalik, who, I mean, we have one of the Mahaliks in Arizona. I work with the Coyotes, so the Mahalik brothers are super good for morale. They're really good for work effort, even if they're not necessarily super talented. We've got guys like Jake Gardner, Morgan Riley. They want to win, and Mike Babcock does not like to lose, especially moral victories. So they've been working a lot on their puck possession game this year. Even if they're not winning the games, they're not losing them like they did last year. Like last year, you'd watch the Leafs and they'd be hemmed in their own end. They'd take 10 shots over 2 periods. This year, they're out shooting a lot of teams. So, I mean, if the Islanders aren't ready to go, it could be an upset win for the Leafs. But as long as the Islanders play like they're supposed to, they've obviously got more talent. So, I mean, it should be an exciting game, though. The Leafs have been more fun to watch this year, for sure.
Yeah, now some of the guys you mentioned, some of the more the veteran players, maybe more the named household names, but obviously they Leafs very high on William Nylander, who's I think playing tomorrow, or tonight, I should, or on Wednesday night against the Islanders. So, you got Nylander. What are the Leafs prospects or Leafs younger players should Islander fans really keep an eye on as to potentially do some damage tomorrow night?
One of them, like I mentioned, Morgan Riley, if he's turned 21, it was recently. He's still pretty young. He's a fantastic defenseman, and he's still just coming into his own. I mean, 21-year-old defensemen, if they're still in the AHL, no one thinks twice about that. And he's doing really well at the NHL level. Like you said, William Nylander, he's so exciting to watch. So even if you're not wanting the Leafs to win, he's a player that Islanders fans can watch and enjoy the hockey they're getting from him. Nikita Soshnikov's a really good guy. I think he's been playing on their top line, which, I mean, the Leafs are kind of rolling four lines. They don't have one clear top line right now, but they've been giving, Soshnikov a lot of offensive starts, and he's translating them into goals. Then they've got Zach Hyman, who is former NCAA player. They took him from the Panthers over the summer. He's got a name that's fun to make fun of, but he's also got a pretty decent game. I'm trying to think of who else. They might have Connor Carrick in the lineup. They might have Frank Corrado in the lineup. Those are both young guys that maybe Islanders fans don't know very well. Corrado was a waiver pickup. He's been decent. And Connor Carrick actually came with Brooks Lake from the Washington Capitals, and he's another prospect who could really solidify their blue line. So pretty much anyone who's not over 30 on their roster is a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and as an Islander fan and as an Islander podcast, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about the three former Islanders that the Maple Leafs employ. Obviously, Michael Grabner was traded to Toronto this September, and former top-line wingers P.A. Parenteau and Brad Boyes also called Toronto their home. So, how are they performing? Is Michael Grabner still missing three breakaways a night? If
Uh, Yeah.
Is PA Parento as good as his numbers look? And maybe you could give us some insight as to why they weren't traded at the deadline.
At the start of the year, I was not high on PA Parento. And he's slowly won me over throughout the year. Like, he just seems to keep getting better. I think he's working within Babcock's system. Michael Grabner he's Michael Grabner. You guys know what he offers. It's nothing new here. Not really sure why the Leafs didn't trade them at the deadline. PA Parento we saw him miss a couple games here and there for injury, so that could have scared off some teams. Leafs might have also wanted to keep some of those veteran bodies who were able to produce both from a scoring and possession standpoint in the lineup, because it's one thing to tank, it's another thing to tank where you basically have to call up guys from the ECHL just to get a warm body on the ice, so they couldn't trade everyone away. It was kind of a bummer not seeing them get rid of them, and I know a lot of other teams were kind of surprised by that too, but I'm not mad that they're still here. They're not necessarily exciting to watch, but they're fun because they just make the game, like I said, it's that quality over last year. They're better to watch than last year. So even in that aspect, it's nice watching them just because they know how to play hockey.
And those guys have a shot, you think, of being re-signed in the offseason, or do you think that they're one and done here with the Leafs, and then the Leafs will, with their bundles of cap space, and obviously I'm sure they have grandiose plans of Steven Stamkos playing number one center for them next year, but any of those ex-Islanders, you think they'll be with the Leafs next season, or this is their final 20 games here?
Parento's been pretty open about, I think he wants to come back. He's been saying that he's open to coming back in the off season. I think for the right price, the team will definitely retain him. The others, I'm not so sure. I think it'll depend on whether they have room in their lineup or not, which, that the Stamkos question, that can change the whole lineup. But as for Parento, I definitely think he could come back. He seems to want to, and the team seems to like him, so.
I think one question that a majority of hockey fans from the outside looking in would have with the Maple Leafs would be about Jonathan Bernier, who was signed to an extension and, for all intents and purposes, was looked at as the Maple Leafs franchise goalie. And this year, under Babcock, it seems like he's barely gotten a chance. He got off to a really slow start and then got hurt, I believe. And then Reimer got the starting job, and now Bernier is still backing up to Garrett Sparks. So what's been with the downfall of Bernier? Is it an example of a coach giving the goalies a fresh start and not playing favorites, or has his play been that bad?
I mean, as a goalie, it's been frustrating to watch Jonathan Bernier because coming into the season, I would have called him their starter. Just from a technical standpoint, from what I figured his ceiling was versus Reimer's. And he just got off to a miserable start. And whether it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, whether he believed that he couldn't do well, or he tweaked something and just couldn't really get himself healthy enough to get going again, which he did miss time for injury, so that's always a possibility. Whatever it was, he just wasn't winning the games. And Garrett Sparks is a player who, he was drafted by the Leafs really late in, I believe, 2011. He was like a 6th or 7th round pick. Went to the World Juniors with Team USA as their third goalie, and then ended up having hip surgery. And I believe he had 2 hip surgeries and had to come back from that. And that's not easy to do, but he did. And he actually wrote an essay for us that he let us publish over at Leafs Nation about how he completely changed his style to prevent more hip injuries in the future. So he's a really cerebral goalie. He really thinks about the best way to make his game long-lasting. He was fine with going to the ECHL for a year when he was recovering from surgery. He played a game in the ECHL this year just to get that playing time. And I think that Babcock appreciates that. He knows that this is a guy who works hard, knows what it takes to get to where he wants to be, and was willing to put in the dirty work. Whereas, Bernier, I don't want to say pitched a tantrum when he wasn't playing well and just kind of let everything fly off the rails, but he definitely came close to that. So I'm not going to concretely say that Babcock's giving the starting job to Sparks because of attitude, but it certainly looks like it. So that's that's my prediction. But you guys will like watching Sparks. He's a lot of fun. He has really great goalie pads.
And not surprisingly, a Canadian team needs an American to lead them somewhere. So we're joined here by Kat Silverman of the Leafs Nation as we preview a little bit of the Islanders Maple Leafs game Wednesday night in Toronto. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, Toronto. It's in, right? I think so. Regardless, one name, Kat, I think you omitted early on when you were going over some of the roster guys is Nazem Kadri, and I'm sure it's one of the names Islander fans may be a little more familiar with. He was drafted the same year as John Tavares. I think he was 9th overall. He's never seemed to be able to take off offensively. I know he's been in the news recently for, I think he had a throat slashing gesture towards Marcus Giordano back in February that fined him a couple bucks in his pocket. He seems to kind of be the one player if you read Leafs boards, now that Phaneuf is gone, he kind of seems to get a lot of the ire of Maple Leaf fans. So what happened with Kadri? I know they had high hopes for him, and they still may, but obviously you have new administration there with Lou Lambs and Brendan Shanahan who didn't draft him. So what's up with Kadri? Is he really is he has 1 foot out the door, or what's going on with him?
I think a lot of people assume that he's got 1 foot out the door because the previous administrations did not like him. Previous coaches weren't big fans of him. I know that I believe it was his last 3 coaches he didn't get along with. Don't think Dave Nonis loved him too much, which nobody loved Dave Nonis, so that's fine. I know that when Brendan Shanahan came in, he and Mike Babcock sat Kadri down and they talked to him about, not necessarily changing his style of play, but changing his mentality, whether it came to working harder in practice, doing more individualized workouts, having more of a sort of workhorse attitude coming into the games, just becoming a leader for the team. And I think a lot of people still assume that he is the Nazem Kadri who overslept and missed a team meeting, got suspended for it last year. But I think the new coach and the new administration actually do have a lot of faith in him. And if anything, I think that Tyler Bozak's the one who's out the door. And he's been out with injury, so we can't pin it on him too much right now, but I think they really believe in Nazem Kadri, and I think that he's a polarizing player to watch. Like you said, he draws a lot of ire from the Leafs fans because he does do things like the throat slashing gesture. And last year he kind of threw an elbow at the head of an Oilers player and ended up getting suspended for that. So he's definitely a player that people can love or hate, both on his team and on the opposition's team. But he's got some great underlying numbers. His scoring's not as bad as they make it out to be. I think he's promising. I mean, I didn't mention him because he is a name that I figure people already knew, but he's one that he's a lot of fun to watch. I think that if the Leafs let him go, which I don't think they will, it would be a big loss for them. So
my final question for you would be, have Leaf fans, are they all aboard the tank right now? As in, do they get mad when the team wins?
I think it depends. They're definitely aboard Team Tank. I don't think they necessarily get mad when the team wins because it happens so infrequently. That when they do win, it's kind of like a refreshing change. But yeah, I think for the most part, they're all aboard Team Tank, but in a weird way. There's a surprising number of Leafs fans that are kind of on this Team Tank for Matthews, then trade Matthews for OEL little train, and I'm not really sure where they got that, but that's been like the new thing for them. They all really want to do terribly. They can get the first overall pick, trade it to Arizona, and get Oliver Ekman-Larsson. So that's been fun.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one, but that doesn't make sense really that doesn't make sense for the Leafs, because I think the league has gone more towards you need that number one center to really be to really kind of be one of the elite teams. And if you have a chance to acquire a guy like Matthews for the next 10 years, as much as good as Oliver Ekman-Larsson is, and he is a fantastic player, I think that'd be a real difficult, real tough move to make if they even seriously contemplated that.
I think what a lot of the Leafs fans and Islanders fans dealt with something very similar when they were not so long ago, not an excellent team. Leafs fans have been dealing with a garbage defense for going on 20 years now. Even back when Felix Potvin and Curtis Joseph were in goal, the Leafs bled shots. So I think their big thing is they've got the starry eyes for the number one defender, and they know that the Coyotes are obviously interested in Austin Matthews because he is an Arizona native. He's a product of the Arizona junior hockey system. He played for the Tier 1 AAA team here until he played for the development team. So I think their thing isn't as much the losing of Matthews. It's we could potentially acquire a piece that would draw in this number one defender, which I like Morgan Riley, I like Jake Gardner. They aren't sure either of them are going to be that number one D yet. And a lot of them are still, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of them still really think that Steven Stamkos is coming to Toronto, which if he does, they wouldn't need Austin Matthews. But I don't think either of those are happening. That's a fun scenario that on Leafs Twitter and on Leafs message boards, that's become like the prevalent storyline. It's very weird, and I don't know who started it, but it's kind of taken off. So,
it's funny. Just going over this discussion, it sounds like the Leafs are where the Islanders were back in '08, right before they drafted John Tavares. They had a couple decent young pieces. They didn't have that franchise guy that they can hang their hats on. And obviously, from the looks of it, the Leafs are in for a little bit of a long rebuild. They've already gone through a little bit of that as already, but it seems like it's they're still missing that franchise player, which again they may acquire this summer, whether through free agency or the draft. But the Leafs' current situation, to me at least, has some parallels with the Islanders back in '08. Again, right before '08, '09, before they were able to draft John Tavares on the team.
I mean, there are a lot of parallels right there. And I think that Leafs fans can look to that. And like I said, they're really concerned about getting this number one defenseman. Travis Hamonic wasn't necessarily considered an Oliver Ekman-Larsson. He's still not. He's not that style of defenseman, but he developed into a player above, at least when I was watching him as a prospect, he's developed above where I assumed he was going to be. So I think they forget that they have so many pieces in their system already that could develop into these real key franchise players. But like you said, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be kind of painful. So I just hope they're ready for it. It's not going to be fun.
I don't think Leaf fans will be as patient as Islander fans are. I think if this is their '08, I don't think they'll be willing to wait until 2024 for a playoff series win. But that's just my opinion.
Well, they've been waiting since '67 for a title, so maybe they figure if a few more years of dread will get them a title, then they'll be okay with it.
Yeah, so from
the problem with the Leafs fans is they haven't had their title since '67, haven't had a playoff win, and it's been over a decade at this point. They've only made the playoffs once in the last 11 years. They're at the point where I think they're going to be a little bit more patient because and for me, the Leafs flew off the rails when they fired Pat Quinn. For other people, it was a little bit later. It was when they started hiring Randy Carlyle, Dave Nonis. I thought it was about '05-06 era is when things really started to fly off. But they've been pretty much in a tailspin for over a decade. So at this point, the fact that there's direction, even if it's slow direction, I think they're just relieved. Because it was comical watching them for a while. They were just getting worse by the year, and they were spending more money to get worse. So I think they're finally ready, even if it takes a long haul, just for that semblance of order. They're ready for things to stop looking like there is no end to it. I mean, the Leafs were getting rid of good defenders. They had no goaltending to speak of. They had a real franchise center in Matt Sundin, who never had a winger for him. Pick up Phil Kessel, never bother getting a franchise center for him. So it's like they really had no direction with how they were doing things, and now they do. So I think they'll be a little bit more patient, just because they did deal with that absolute train wreck for so long.
I mean, I don't like the Maple Leafs because my first memory as a hockey fan was that 0-1 playoff series with Mike Pekka and Darcy Tucker and Gary Roberts and Kenny Johnson. But I will say I would accept helping them tomorrow by helping their tank and the Islanders beating them. So I'll make amends at that point with that, Leaf fans. I'd like to thank Catherine for taking time out of her busy schedule to join us. Make sure to check her out at, is it theleafsnation.com?
It is.
Make sure to check her out there. It's always good to be a part of a nation. So, Catherine, thank you once again.
Thanks, Catherine.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thanks for listening, guys, and let's go Islanders.